So more difficult or less difficult. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how trustworthy that.
Well, there are a whole lot more similar. I mean, you look at the two tests in Weagle's paper, they were basically IELTS 1 and IELTS 2, two very different tests. One was the data analysis test, one was, hypothetical. But ours are all the same genre tests.
Yeah, yeah. And we do craft the tasks very carefully, because they have to be generic enough, but applicable to the academic environment, and of differing levels of severity, differing difficulty. Like the IEP comps are going to be easier than the UT comp topics to write about, but they're just going to be different.
What do you mean by they're all the same genre?
None of them are data analysis comps.
Yeah.
Okay. And I misspoke, because yes, indeed, some of them will be persuasive, some of them are, maybe opinion leading, so there are different in that degree. But what I was really referring to was in the Weagle paper, there was, the data analysis prompts are always, they sort of separate the engineers from the non-engineers. The ones who are used to that, they're comfortable with that, and we don't do any of those prompts. So those, if you had one prompt that was interpreting data and then another prompt that was describing the main problems in your country, I would expect a wide degree of variability.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, there are many, I would argue there are many genres
Yeah.
in the prompts.
Yeah.
There's comparison, contrast, there's argument, there's extended definition,
Yep.
and of course there's the mix of different kinds of genres.
And
some are more difficult.
Right.
Because you need, if you're gonna do comparison contrast essay, the grammatical structures that you need to be able to do that
Sure.
with any kind of degree of accuracy
Sure.
are, the difficulty level goes way up.
Well, say if you're doing a what-if kind of essay, you have to, yeah. But for example, we don't do any analysis of argument essays. We don't, so I think there are broad differences, but you're absolutely right, there are
Yeah.
certainly.
Okay. Yeah. But for these four particular tasks, statistically, they were not differentiated by very much in terms of their difficulty. In terms of the scores, at least in the scores that we gave them to the participants. Fifth question: is it more likely for candidates to get a better score in certain subcategories? So here are the four subcategory measures. This would be easier, this would be more difficult. Anybody want to take a guess at what's the most difficult category to get a good score on?
Grammar.
Think so?
Vocabulary, I think. That's vocabulary.
Like grammar and Lexis? Ian's guess is correct. So, yeah. The GRA was the most difficult. Task fulfillment, task development was the relative easiest. So more difficult, yeah. Okay. So answer to research question, yes. And better score probably in task fulfillment, task development. We'll come back to that in a minute. Are the subcategory ratings consistent? So in the task fulfillment, task development category, the data did what's called misfit the model. So the ratings that were given didn't consistently fit the predicted ratings that should have, or that the model predicted that would be given in several cases, and so it made the overall fit to be not quite right. So that means there's a lot of, there's more variability in our ratings for this category than for the other three. So we're not as consistent in giving ratings for this category as the other three. There are different reasons, or possible reasons. We've talked about, Ray actually brought up earlier today when he and I were talking about this. One is someone misunderstanding the prompt, or particularly topics related that we've had debates on is how important is it for someone to have laser-like focus on the exact intent of the prompt, and are we all in agreement on it? subcategories, yes, we were consistent with what the model predicted, so it fit the model. Seventh, are the rating subcategories statistically separable, or maybe are we just actually rating two or three things, or one thing? There were only two distinct subcategories or groups. Essentially, that's an argument that we're only really rating two constructs, whatever the constructs happen to be.
Content and organization and language.
Pretty much.
And yeah,
Oh.
it actually, in terms of the ratings, the numbers and the ratings and the consistency, it looked like task fulfillment, task development, and everything else. That seemed to be kind of the grouping, was organization and cohesion, that was pretty consistently scored with Lexis and grammar.
That's interesting, I would not have expected that.
Well, no, that actually makes sense, because the Lexis that's required, and if you think about, say, old new information order, you have to have some understanding of grammar to achieve that. You think the Lexis that's required to offer transitioning or cohesive language, you know, so there is some sense to that.
And then my last question was what types of unexpected ratings arose in the data? And I already mentioned kind of the variability in the task fulfillment, task development. There were some unexpected cases there. There were 7 cases, but for 6 different raters. So like essentially what this model does is it looks for bias. Like if raters have a bias against a particular person, particularly like a person making a presentation or something like that, and you want to be able to detect that in the model, so then you can go back to the ratings themselves and say, okay, what's wrong here? But there wasn't any kind of systematic, like it wasn't, it wasn't like Annalise just had something against all the Chinese students, and so she rated them all low or something like that on a certain category. 5 of the cases were in task fulfillment and task development, and the other 2 were in the organization and cohesion. I went back and looked, and it did appear in a couple of the cases with the task fulfillment, task development, at least, that it was that the person misunderstood the prompt but wrote really well, and so based on all their other scores, you would have expected them to do well. So that is an explanation for why that would happen. I don't know if that's happening across the board. And then in one of these, I looked up, and it was a person from India who wrote really well, followed the task, but the organizational structure was not, didn't fit what we expect. And we talked about that during a couple of different calibration sessions that I've been a part of. So yeah, we'll go on from that. So implications, I think, in a couple of areas. First, for the rating sessions, again, I'll be beating the dead horse during the fall when we're doing this all again. Is like, let's make sure to vary who does the comps. I would like to get more and more data to really be able to accumulate more power in the analysis. Take time to read the comps carefully, obviously. If you know you're on either end of the severity spectrum, I think it's something to think about. Why that might be in relation to everyone else. Do you notice during calibration sessions that you're generally on the more severe side? Okay, are there good reasons for why? And an implication of that, I think, are the calibration sessions are really important for getting us at least to where we're discussing the different ratings, so to where we can give as consistent of ratings as we can to the students. I think we owe that to them. Yes.
Did you look at the data that Ray collects in the calibration sessions to see if the people that were more severe in the calibration session were also the people that were more severe when they were actually rating?
Ray brought up the same topic, and I think that's a great question. Because that's a set of data that Ray has, and so that's something that I can do. I think that'd be a very interesting follow-up. If I end up doing that, then I will certainly let you know. Yes?
To comment, I'm not sure how accurate that would be. At least I think several of us were
Right.
changing our scores to kind of fit in.
Well, I think it's the rubric for me. I notice I'm the most severe, and I think I've mentioned this before. I try to really carefully read the rubric, and I feel like everyone has a different understanding of what the rubric says. And I think that I'm very, maybe I'm OCD in this, but if like I look at a rubric, I wanna make sure I follow it properly and carefully. So even if we have a discussion where maybe people interpret it differently, I try to look at what's there. So I'm
And,
interested if the calibration sessions, that's a question I had when I read this article, if they change our behavior, do they actually change how we rate?
in the research that I know of, and that, I took a language testing course in my department in the fall, and, the professor said there are conflicting, findings in terms of
Because that's what this
the validity of training raters or retraining raters. Now, I think that's kind of a little bit different of a question than applying the rubric, which I think is an important question. That if we get together and talk, I think we can refine the way that we're applying the rubric, at least relative to
There are
each other.
some, I mean, that's right, there's some clearly subjective interpretations of the rubric. I mean, when you have things like difficulty on the reader, it's like the oral rubrics, you know, some people have difficulty understanding the Indian accent, some people don't. So an Indian speaker is going to get partially rated by one and not by the other. And it's similar with the textual content.
Right, yeah, and we've talked about that, yeah, but
I have trouble understanding what we're rating them against. Like, are we rating them against absolute flawless, errorless English, or English that's perfectly acceptable in the university? And I think that's why I'm more lenient, because if it's like on par with what other people would do at the university, then I think that's fine. But that's something I get confused about.
So I
It's
think
a-
we
it's
should
an
be
interesting
rating it
question.
against the four,
You know,
What?
the four band.
Mhm.
It's not native, so-called native. There's still errors and little
That's why I
problems.
But it seems like we come across compositions that would be like good for a freshman, and we
That's a
still
good
like rate
question,
them low.
though. I do proofread some students who are in college right now, and some of their writing is pretty bad compared to our students. I mean, it's
Especially when it
true,
comes to
and
organization
there's
and
juniors or seniors that are
yeah,
passing,
definitely.
and I don't know if this is just a
That's what
here issue, I think it's an issue throughout the ESL community, but do we have sample essays of actual freshmen that we can?
and our.
Or do we
is-
care?
is
Because in
that,
my mind, I have the,
Well-
what they should be able to write at, but that might be a higher expectation than what actual college freshmen can write these days.
Well,
but we've got the minimum confidence in that.
but this research is focusing on first-year graduate students.
right, this is focused on when we were rating the grad students. So, I mean, I think the question is still a valid question.
These
Yeah.
are admitted students.
Conditionally admitted students, because their writing scores on TOEFL were lower.
So Engelhardt alludes to norming the scores for rater severity and domains of difficulty. Do we have enough data to do that? Have we thought about doing that?
I don't think we have enough data just from that. I mean, I could certainly look at it. The fair mean average score is something of a norming, but
Yeah, but I mean, then to take the severity and then, it's a little bit like curving grades.
Right.
But,
right, to take severity into account, that,
I mean, you're finding that one comp rated by 2 raters could have passed and by 2 others could have failed. I think any of us who've been in this game long enough, we know, yeah, that's. an
yeah,
accurate fact.
I would have told you that beforehand.
Yeah,
that-
exactly.
that could have
And
happened.
it is, especially when you're working with the 07 students and you know what the stakes are and the expense and the time here, it's a high stakes game, and yet we try to keep that in mind, but the truth of it, it's not high stakes for anybody in this room. So, you know, when you see things like that, and when you go back and you read comps and you say, I have no idea how this got a 2 on past development, you know. Those are times when this idea of norming for severity is to me at least, very attractive.
It is, that's a preliminary conversation that I've brought up with Liz, and it's something that we're, obviously not opposed to, but, I mean, it doesn't take away from the importance of what we're doing at
Yeah.
the same time.
But to follow up on the comment that was made earlier about the standards, I have one student, and I had him 05, I got him this semester in 07. And his big complaint is he's grad student, of course, he's getting A's and A pluses on the papers that he submits, and why is he not getting passing grades on the writing he submits? So I asked him, well, show me one of the papers that you've gotten an A on. And, you know, from any reasonable perspective, it's highly flawed English. Right out of the bat, fragments and things, and so I don't know if the professor is just like said, I just have to deal with content, and I can't deal with these mechanics or what it is.
How about the global part? Could you assess that at all?
Yes, absolutely, that's all, I always do that first and then go back and, well, from the point of view of